we have a piece of news that you need to know that's very important. The Digital India Bill. That's right. This is the bill that is going to govern everything that affects you, from fact-checking to misinformation to artificial intelligence and other things that affects your lives today and going forward as well. What will this bill be all about? And more importantly, will it be able to protect you, the consumer, from all that is happening in the world of technology that you are exposed to even without your own knowledge most of the time? Kartik Malhotra will be there, and we have some very special guests joining us on the broadcast as well. We have the founder of Medianama, Mr. Nikhil Pahwa, joining us, and also Mr. Kumar Gupta, founder of FinTech Capital. But the point of the matter at this stage is, ladies and gentlemen, the Digital India Bill will be thrown open for public consultation in just a couple of weeks from now. It was supposed to be released, but then the government did do an outreach program through which it got feedback from experts across the country. The government reached out to Mumbai, Bengaluru, and other cities and got some feedback. And that feedback led the government to believe that some changes need to be made for this Digital India Bill, which will eventually replace the IT Act of the year 2000. Because, ladies and gentlemen, since then, the levels of cyber crimes have only gone up and up and up. Kartik, that's very important, isn't it? That's the reason why the Digital India Bill is getting delayed and more feedback is being taken. Cyber crime is at an all-time high right now, Kartik.
Cyber crime linked to that, data protection, leakage of data, the powers vested with the big tech and potential exploitation of those powers, and who's at the receiving end? At the receiving end, as you mentioned, Krishna, it is us, the consumers. I think what is very important to note here is that the IT Act that we have is of the year 2000. We are talking about a time when .com was just about fledgling before the burst in the .com really happened. So we are talking about a 23-year-old act which governs organizations doing business in India using data, deploying technology and dealing with your life and my life on the digital space. Now, it's 23 years to that, and about time that a new bill, a new draft, a new legislation and a new regulation, and regulation is the key word here. Right. How much of it should be influenced by what the government wants, and how much of the regulation should accrue to what the citizens of India deserve. I think these are some of the issues that we should touch upon today.
Oh, absolutely. And to do that, Kartik, we're being joined by Mr. Nikhil Pahwa, founder, Medianama, now joining us on the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Nikhil. We have Avisha also joining us. I'm just going to take this across to Nikhil first. Nikhil, talk to us quickly. Your first thoughts on this Digital India Bill. It will replace the IT Act. It will be a brand new act and a bill altogether. More specifically, they are taking this back to the drawing board because of things like fact-checking, misinformation, artificial intelligence.
Thanks. So the Digital India Act, the DIA is being called. Mr. Chandrasekhar has held several meetings and consultations on this. They've mostly been closed and private, but the presentation for that was available on METI's website. And one of the things that I noticed about what Mr. Chandrasekhar, and he said this in interviews as well, was that they will remove safe harbor protections for intermediaries. And he's asked, do we even need safe harbor now? It's a complex phrase, not many people understand it. But what safe harbor is that, if I'm putting something, if I'm saying something on your show, you are not liable for it. If I'm putting something on social media, the social media platform is not liable for it. I am. So if those protections are removed, the platform will be liable for it. And in that sense, the platform can't survive it. So if the safe harbor is removed, as what Mr. Chandrasekhar has been talking about for quite a while, basically the internet will not be able to survive this kind of a change. So we have to be very careful. The IT Act may be old. It was amended for the better in 2008. And the protections that it has given us are important for us to retain. So the principles should be the same about having the internet which is open, global, competitive, accessible to all, and most importantly, support Startup India. Startup India will not survive this removal of safe harbor which Mr. Chandrasekhar has been talking about.
Right. Stay with us, Nikhil. Let me take this across to Avisha Gupta as well, partner of Luthra and Luthra Law Offices, joining us now. Avisha, thank you so much for taking time out. Quickly talk to us. There is the Digital Data Protection Bill as well, and now we have the Digital India Bill, both focusing on the same thing. There are no-go areas which this bill could have as far as the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies are concerned, specifically with regards to how companies process the data that they have from their customers, how they process it. Will they use, they should not be able to use artificial intelligence while processing the data, that kind of no-go areas.
Sure. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on. Regarding your question first on there being existing law on the subject, as well as draft legislations around digital data protection bill. There's also a draft telecom bill that is floating. How we see it and how Mr. Chandrasekhar in some of his consultation process has described this parallel sort of regulatory framing is in terms of an overarching framework of technology regulations that is being built around data protection bill as well as the telecom bill, also the policy around non-personal data that has been in and out for some time, along with this Digital India bill, is sort of an overarching framework of tech regulations that is being seen in totality. There could be areas of overlap between these bills, and there could be areas of overlap in existing laws vis-a-vis the Digital India bill, and that is something that definitely remains to be seen. But that happens with, in any form of regulation that is around technology, because technology by itself in its definition is converging quite a bit in many of the areas. So we will see certain overlaps, but I would say we should see this as a larger framework of technology regulations and Digital India bill forming one part of it.
Fair enough. Stay with us. Nikhil, I want to quickly ask you, just to, right at the top of my mind, this bill will cover, all consumer-facing businesses and enterprises which use artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. And there I have a question. That means all your OTT platforms and all your apps which provide you all kinds of goods and services, all of them will also be subject to regulation on how they use my data, as in your data, as in the consumer's data, with artificial intelligence.
And I think that's a good thing, but also they shouldn't be disallowed from using artificial intelligence. Look, if Netflix makes some recommendations to us for that, because you watched these shows, maybe you will like this one. And we see that in music as well. We see that in search results being optimized for what we want. It actually helps save us time. It helps us as consumers. So data processing using artificial intelligence has been a key part of making the right recommendations to us for decades now. And to remove that will only hurt our experience. So I think we need to be careful how we tread with artificial intelligence, because yes, there are concerns and dangers about, misuse of artificial intelligence, but we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. AI actually helps us
Fair enough, Nikhil.
Harms us right now.
Fair enough, Nikhil. The reason why I'm asking is that now, aren't we all sick and tired of a little bit of all the algorithm-ridden world that we live in? Literally all of our choices tend to be informed because of algorithms, Avisha, isn't it?
That's right. Which is why, and I see it in a positive light, at least the talk right now is around not regulating the technology itself, but focusing on harm around the artificial intelligence that can potentially cause. Yes, how do you go about defining harm in the first place and then regulating something like this is another question. But at least the going in position of coming up with a risk-based or a principle-based approach is something that is definitely welcome. But again, completely agree with Nikhil. Parts of AI and a large part of AI is actually beneficial for the consumers at large, and having a lens of harm is a good starting point to have, but definitely need to go much more beyond it and see essentially where regulation is needed, because it needs to be a risk-based approach. Not all artificial intelligence technology should be regulated similarly, and there needs to be factoring for size, there needs to be factoring for the extent and scale of risk involved apart from factors like harm. So a good starting point, but definitely would love to see more coming in.
Right. One thing I'd like to add over here.
All right, Nikhil, come in. You can come in.
I'd like to see a completely separate regulation for artificial intelligence, to be honest, because it is too vast, too complex, too nuanced a domain for it to be just included and have a one line creating a regulation or one paragraph or one clause regulating that space. That means that it won't.
Don't we have enough bills doing the rounds, Nikhil? That's why I started by asking. There's a digital data protection bill, there's a digital India bill, there's a telecom bill. Too many regulations, possibly by the time we finish drafting all of these things.
I completely agree. In fact, the data protection bill has now been in the works for 5 years. The government should have finished that off 2 years ago. I don't think we should suffer for the lack of poor decision making from a government's perspective, right? Poor policy making. They've basically just kept delaying the process. If the data protection bill doesn't get tabled this time, will it even pass before the elections is my question. So let's not, there are too many bills, but that's all because the process has been delayed so far. You've had 8 years of this government, almost 9 years of this government to pass some of these bills that are essential for Digital India. If you've delayed it, why is it that everything needs to be clubbed together? Not enough thought and attention being given to an important area like artificial intelligence. It needs to be given its own time, I think.
Nikhil, I have a question for you, and since you mentioned elections, is something that's been on top of my mind as well. Is there a dying hurry for the government to make sure that this bill is passed in the coming monsoon season, giving the government enough time to regulate fact-checking, to regulate misinformation, and potentially curb AI with the threat of deep fakes looming?
No, I honestly don't think so. There is no way that this bill is getting passed in the monsoon session. It first needs to be tabled. There needs to be a consultation process.
Do you think this bill will be drafted? Let me phrase it differently. Do you think this bill is drafted keeping election season in mind?
I think we already have regulations in place keeping election season in mind. Look at the fact-checking unit that has been set up under the IT rules. Look at the liability that is there for social media platforms, including criminal liability for an employee of a social media platform that's in place, because of which there is using accounts being taken down, using tweets being censored. So if you already have that censorship regime in place, there is nothing for deepfakes, I agree, but deepfakes would again be under misinformation, and it is possible for them to use fact-checking team to address the deepfakes issue as well. So you don't need a law because you already have these rules in place without a law supporting them. And I know that is unconstitutional the way they've gone about it, but they already have these tools which have already been using. So I don't think this bill is going to get tabled and passed. You might see more rules and regulations come in. You will see more deployment of these, like for example, websites can be censored, news articles can be censored under the IT rules 2020, even though there is now a stay order on that. But you will use the fact-checking mechanism to basically address those issues. I don't think we'll see this bill passed. Let's not fool ourselves. The data protection bill is probably the only one that will probably get passed. The telecom bill, again, no one's seen the new draft. There was only one draft, which was terrible, to be honest. And we haven't heard of it since then.
Right.
So the only one that, in my mind, is going to get passed is the data protection bill. That's it. I don't expect anything else to be passed.
Fair enough. Avisha, Nikhil, I'll get back to you as well. Avisha, my question here is that this time around, you had a government starting a consultation process, a feedback outreach process that began in the month of March, and then now it's going to be put for public consultation for another 2 weeks. Experts from across the big cities of the country have been consulted. It's a good way of going about, bringing about a bill that's covering futuristic technologies at this stage when things are changing so quickly. We went from Chat GPT to GPT-3 in a matter of a month or so.
For sure, and interesting that you brought this up because I wanted to take this discussion beyond AI and bring it to the emerging tech that is there. Perhaps AI could be the backbone of all of these technologies, but
it's the headline grabber.
The way that they are being used are very different and very different in their application and form. So the point that is there is it's good to have this consultation process specifically because it's anybody's guess as to what the country's technology framework or the use by consumers is going to look like in the next 5 years. And this is what comes up with emerging tech. It's emerging for a particular reason, because the kind of harms, the kind of benefits that come with it are really undefined. And unless we have this dedicated stakeholder consultation process, we cannot come up with a law which is meaningful or implementable in any form. So it's good to have this consultation process. But at the same time, what I would have liked rather was to also have some form of contours of the bill. Yes, the presentation was out there on the basis of which the consultation happened, but just those presentations with a few bullet points, perhaps we need more color than that to really comment upon and see it in the best light. And perhaps the public consultation process will give us that opportunity to deep dive into issues and give meaningful suggestions to come up with a law that is practical, implementable, and a balance between public interest and innovation.
Avisha, give us some examples of how these bills are passed globally, and what are the contours of the bills that you may have, through your legal framework, kept an eye on. What are the contours of such legislations and regulations globally?
So EU has been very active in regulating artificial intelligence, and of course, we've seen a lot of regulators react to how ChatGPT has been adopted by the world at large, with Italy coming up with its own concerns around privacy. So the way that globally regulators are looking at this is in terms of fitting the existing technology in the existing legal framework. For example, Italy basing all its concerns around ChatGPT basis their existing privacy law. And there are parts of the world which are coming up with enactments, like I said, EU around regulating this proactively rather than looking and falling back on the existing regulations. And what we need perhaps is the latter approach, having a dedicated framework. I'm really neutral to having a separate law or keeping it within the Digital India framework. But so long as the broad contours are defined and there's enough room and scope left for innovation to happen, it should be good. The way that regulators are looking at across world, and I think it's a right approach to take, is the risk-based approach around AI and the harm that it could cause. The severe the harm, the more stringent the ban around use of those technologies is, and then it keeps getting liberal with the level of risk getting reduced. So these sort of broad lenses around harm, risk-based approach, principle-based approach,
Sure.
they are all, I believe, good starting points.
Okay. Nikhil, let me get you in again. Now, you spoke about intermediaries being held responsible for the content published on their platforms. Now, remember, these are platforms. These are not content creators themselves. And this is where the big tech comes in. What does an act like this do for big tech to operate in a country like India?
So, look, I think it actually helps big tech if an act like this comes out and puts them under more regulation, because the cost of regulation will actually make it difficult for competition to come up against them. If you look at the EU's data protection bill, the GDPR, actually what happened as a function of that was that it cemented Google and Facebook's advertising business and killed a lot of small ad networks in the EU. So while the narrative around this is that it's going to hurt big tech and harm big tech, let's face it, they have the money to deal with these problems. It's the smaller players that get impacted. So we have to be very careful about these regulations, that they shouldn't hurt smaller players. They shouldn't be so harmful to the internet. Like removing safe harbor means that also big tech may not survive. Think of the millions of hours of video that is uploaded on YouTube every day. YouTube can't pass through or go through every video to see whether it violates any law or not. If it's held liable for it, YouTube will not survive. So we have to be very careful how we tread, because A, we want to protect the carriers of our free speech as well, because all of our free speech is carried by them today, right? And secondly, you also want to make sure the regulations aren't that stringent and that harmful that maybe they'll cost the big tech companies a few $100 million a year to deal with them or over a 5-year period.
But it kills innovation.
It kills the smaller players. It kills the innovation. It kills competition for big tech. So be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. In that sense, we have to be. That's why these things needed more public consultation. even with AI, there are other theories also about whether you should look at it. It needs to be looked at differently from different angles. Like data protection and discrimination is one set of concerns. Copyright is a completely different issue because if it's generating content, who owns the copyright to it?
Yeah.
It's also based on data that you and I may have generated online over the years.
Absolutely, which the
What
machine
are
has
our
learned and
rights over there?
repurposed and given new words
Right.
and new flavor to it.
So in terms of AI also, there are multiple angles to look at, not just copyright, not just data protection. You can do harms based also. So it needs much more thinking. I don't think we should rush into regulating AI, and we should need to give it its own due amount of time, I think.
Just one more thing I wanted to ask you, Nikhil, about this, because this bill is also meant to sort of mitigate the new age offences, including possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material, improper and unauthorized digital use of government-issued identity cards. These are new age crimes that are shocking people to the point where we're numbed out reading about these instances on social media and elsewhere.
So I think the problem is not the law, the problem is the enforcement. Are you saying that identity theft is not illegal in this country? Of course it is. Are you saying that distribution of child sexual abuse material is not illegal in this country? Of course it is. You're just trying to say that a new law will solve the problem, whereas the problem is there's bad enforcement, there's improper enforcement. You don't have regulatory capacity, you don't have police capacity to enforce these laws that already exist. Let's take defamation and misinformation and disinformation, right? Are you saying that no laws exist in this country to address those issues? Of course they do. So while there is a theory that you need new laws for the internet, the fact is a crime is a crime is a crime. You need to be able to enforce it. You just don't have the enforcement capacity. So I wouldn't say, if you're hiding behind the fact that you need a new law and therefore you're not able to address these issues, I'm sorry, you had that opportunity. Even the Aadhaar Act, gives protections to consumers against misuse. So and that law was passed about 5 years ago. Where's the enforcement is my question. You just keep coming up with more laws and more laws, but
Fair
if
enough.
there's no enforcement, there's no point.